All right, it looks like we're live, so this should be recording. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first public broadcasting of a Juju Charmers Hangout, where we're going to discuss a bunch of stuff, discuss potential policies, issues, things that concern the charming community. So this is April 1st, 2015. Joined with 6 additional Juju Charmers from the Charmers team. They are all left to right. So I guess we're going to kick off with the notes from last meeting. Chuck.
Sure thing. We had a couple topics, one of which was the hours for the meeting. That has been addressed. The second item on the docket was about Charmer meetings being more public, to be on Google Hangouts. Hello, everybody. I would say that that's been addressed as well. There were some review queue woes. Those are actively being addressed. We have a topic on documentation. Docs sent many notices over the last month, moved to a version lock number, and the doc quality is still fairly lacking in charm authorship. As Tilde Charmers, we need to own this section and contribute to this cleanup effort. We still have a pending resolution on that one, and we need to coordinate with other Charmers. The final item that we had on the docket last meeting was makefiles. Adding a makefile target to charm proof as a target. Subject when missing is I on charm proof. If present, lint for proper target. Set W when targets are not in compliance with policy for CI. This was passed unanimously, and we still have it to do to add the template makefile and add the linting routines. And that's all the notes that we have from the last Charmers meeting.
Sweet, thanks, Chuck. So I guess we'll go ahead and kick this off. Does anyone have any topics they want to open up with? Anything they want to bring for discussion? All right, cool. So I have an item to discuss. So the last week, the Juju Solutions team got together and we did a sprint together, and we spent a lot of time talking about our tools, our processes, the centers of gravity we're interested in. And one thing that came up is the review queue. It seems to be everyone's favorite subject. We all have seen its burdensome. It's burden that it lays on the people. It's a lot to churn through. We don't scale very well with it. The more and more charms we're getting into the review queue, which is a great sign, the longer it takes to get reviews in, which is actually quite devastating to contributors. So we discussed ways that we can help alleviate this process, whether it's things that we can fix in the review queue, things that we can fix in the review process, or how to alleviate this altogether. And one idea that I had proposed that seemed to take off quite well internally, something I'd like to propose to you guys, is changing what we're reviewing in the review queue. So currently we're reviewing the charms codes themselves, and this is fine because we're trying to create a curated charm store, but I'd like to propose, instead of reviewing the actual charm code, we review people instead. So the concept is that as people join the charm contributors community and they start building and adding patches, we review the work that they do into the charm store, and eventually, after a certain amount of commits, certain amount of activity inside the review queue, we can say, okay, this person understands the core concept of charms. They show an aptitude for the quality we wish to possess in the charm store. We no longer need to gate their commits into the charm store itself. And then that way what happens is that whenever they do submit merges in the future, they no longer have to go through a review process. They're unblocked from doing so. So the review queue will really only be, here are new charms that people are submitting for review, for initial review, and then here are the reviews by people who have yet to be, I don't want to say blessed or sanctioned, who have shown, who still require some kind of tutelage or haven't yet met the threshold to become a charmer. And the idea is that the charmer group itself is no longer this guardian of the charm store. Instead, it's a group of people who have shown proficiency in charming, and then instead we open up this kind of a charm janitors group, a group of people who just are helping to marshal stuff in and out of the charm store. But the idea is that becoming a charmer becomes a lot less burdensome, the whole application process. Instead, if you show consistent quality over time, you become a charmer. So it's kind of a heavy topic, but that's essentially where I think would help alleviate a lot of the review process, where people who have shown proficiency, those people who've contributed for quite a long time to charms no longer need to have their stuff blocked for several days, potentially weeks, while just waiting for someone to get a review on. I'm curious of everyone's opinion on that.
I think it's a pretty good step. One question I'd have would be, would that be always global, or would we have the ability to say, okay, this guy obviously knows very well about, I don't know, HA proxy or something, and let's not review what he does for HA proxy, but perhaps if he starts working on MySQL instead, then maybe we'd have to review it. Like, is there something you take into account, or?
So starting off, I initially envisioned just all global, and then as we got more dedicated communities, potentially reining that back in a little bit. That's a good point, though. We do have the separate topic I wanted to bring up, in that the way that we publish stuff to the Charm store is changing. But I guess this is heavily tied to one another. So we are getting a different method of publishing to the Charm store soon. As you all may be aware now, it's heavily tied to Launchpad itself. In the near future, I'd say the next month or two, a tool will be delivered to us with the new Charm store, where instead of pushing to Bazaar, you are simply uploading your tarball directly to the Charm store. So if your charm is promulgated, you get to upload it to that promulgated namespace as the maintainer. So there's currently no direct review process tied to all of this, but we're working with the engineering team responsible for that to make sure that things like, as people are publishing to the Charm store, it's gated on it passing tests to get in and such. So the actual review process would be something that actually eventually fell onto the maintainer themselves. So we'd be saying, you maintain this charm, we trust you to continue maintaining this charm. People will then commit to wherever you're hosting your code repository, whether it's on Launchpad, whether it's on another distributed version control system, and then you publish when you're ready to release a version of that charm instead of automatically having it ingested. So that's also another change that's coming. I probably should have led with that topic first, as it kind of bleeds into this one heavily. So table that previous discussion. That's what we're getting soon. It should be in the form of something like Juju Store Publish or Juju Publish itself, and that'll just directly upload a tarball to the store. By default, it'll land in your namespace unless you have been given access to push to the promulgated, approved namespace itself. So that's something that we can expect to see in the next couple of months coming forward.
So would we require like even long-term people? Like let's look at Stub. Like even this week, I think Matt caught something on one of his branches that it wasn't building, or maybe it was Chuck or Adam. I don't remember who it was.
Yeah.
Anyway, peer review catches stuff even from advanced people. Like nobody knows the PostgreSQL charm better than him. We're kind of not really even at the level where we can give him good feedback a lot of times, but still we find stuff. So it seems like peer review is a good thing in all cases. Why eliminate that from the process? We can't keep up.
Well, we can't scale currently to the magnitude that we have now, and I think the concept that we come up is a periodic review of people rather than a constant review. So occasionally we'll say like, oh, it's been a couple months since someone's had a review. Let's go back to the last couple of merges and check for quality or review stuff. In this future ideal world where charms, where they're basically their own little software projects. You would have more than one person contributing to them and reviewing for your work. And a lot of the stuff that we caught in Stub stuff this last week was more about deltas between what was the expectation of our testing infrastructure and what was actually there for testing infrastructure. So with the exception, I think, of one race condition that came up, everything else was eventually that we need to modify or enhance our tooling to better suit the needs for Stub, because the work and quality was there. The testing was very highly detailed as well. It's probably the more detailed tests that we have for any charm. The testing infrastructure wasn't really set up to handle, or the tools that we had weren't really set up to handle that. And that was a great learning experience from the last week we had. But there was, I think, a race condition discovered in this process. And so reviews are very important. And we'd like to have reviews continue going forward, but we'd like to have it so that people who are interested in that tool or that actual topic would be people who are consistently contributing. So you have a pool of contributors working towards these groups of charms. Like if we've been talking to several people in the big data community, and they're very interested in certain portions of the big data charms where they would be contributing and then other people also contributing, can provide reviews at that level, like what you normally see in a software project where each charm sets up a review process. But what we're doing is we're no longer hindering them from publishing those changes into the store. That's where we want to remove that blocker. So when they're ready to, they should be able to get it in.
Right. So like if Stuart wanted to have somebody review his charm, he could do that. That could be the process he likes to have, but it wouldn't necessarily be one of the charmers, and we wouldn't gate him pushing on one of our reviews.
Exactly.
Yeah, but it would be gated on like passing tests and everything, and that would have caught some of the stuff that were found. So
yeah, right.
Yep.
And with that brought up, I feel like that's also an important part, that we've got a fair amount of charms in the store right now that just have real basic stand-up tests, and that should be one of the baseline requirements to even establish a community, is a comprehensive test suite. Whether that comprehensive test suite just stands it up and checks config values or whatever the case may be. I know that that's a requirement for new charms, but more so speaking to the existing charms.
Yes.
That's going to enable you for success. Without that, you really don't have a baseline for accepting these merges and knowing if you've broken something.
I agree with that. We did a quick sweep of the maintainers list last week just to kind of figure out who's maintaining what and where. And surprisingly, there's a lot of people maintaining charms, but we have actually like a core group of about 10 people that are maintaining more than 5 charms simultaneously. So and most of those charms thankfully have very comprehensive tests. I think that's what enables them to manage that so well. But charms without comprehensive testing is kind of a no-op for this future going forward, since we won't have eyes on review for every single piece of
Marco, did we lose you, or?
I'm thinking he's froze at the moment.
Yeah.
Good, it's not me. I was worried.
Yeah, I was worried as well.
All right. Well, so does anybody have any feedback for this? We're really interested in the people that are not on the ecosystems team that haven't already, talked about this. Do you guys have any feedback, good, bad, or indifferent?
I think it's good in the sense that like increasing bandwidth for the review queue is sorely needed. So I think that goes in the right direction, definitely.
Right. And that's what precipitated this. I mean, we were talking about this not scaling very well, and we don't want to be blocking people to get stuff in, especially if they're just doing the case that we came up with is somebody already went through the review process. They want to release the next version, or they have another fix to a problem, a bug, and they just want to push that in. We don't want to be a blocker for that, and in some cases we are, and we're trying to fix that. So this is a scaling problem on the review queue, and we're open to ideas. If you have any other ideas, we're open to anything else that you guys might have, to make that process better. And you being charmers, you know all the problems, you know all the drawbacks. So.
So how do you become a maintainer of a specific charm? It seems like that kind of goes hand in hand. What's the process for doing that? Because I don't even know.
As it stands today, it's just a pull request against the charm with your name in the maintainer field in the metadata.
Okay.
There's no peer acceptance. You just kind of make that happen. If somebody's actively maintaining it, they'll probably step in and say, "Hey, let's make it maintainers and go maintain."
Sure.
Right, but with this new design going forward, upstream for the charm could potentially live anywhere. Someone's personal Launchpad branch, someone on GitHub, on Bitbucket. In that case, we have to design some kind of way where if a maintainer goes dark, that we're able to switch the upstream for the charm, and that'll just essentially, I think, be the process should be very transparent. Mail to the list you wish to take over maintainership. If we can't contact the current maintainer after a certain amount of time, then we can just simply make that change in the store so that the upstream repo points to your thing, and we give you the proper permission to push to that namespace. But
and so what if we catch, like, what if we're doing a pass of the charms, like related to a specific bundle, and we find one of them just really sucks, doesn't work, the latest three commits to it have been crap. How do we get that out of the charm storage? I mean, as charmers, do we still want to back that out and put it to a working state, or, I mean, what's the process there?
It's interesting. We don't really have much of a process around these things as well. This is something relatively new that we like to flesh out. Since we are all in this charmers group, or eventually this charm maintainers group, where we're actually maintaining the store, we're also part of this larger charmers group, which is charmers or people who we've trusted to make quality commits over time. As this kind of maintainer of the store, we have the ability to point and re-upload these charms versions. So since we have the keys to the store, if we find a charm that's in a promulgated namespace that is broken, the last couple commits being of low quality and low standards, we have the power to revert or push back a good known charm, or just to simply push and overwrite and remove that maintainer while we contact and figure out what's going on. So as the sort of janitors of the store, we'll have the ability to correct things that should have quality but no longer have quality, and then do course corrections by contacting maintainers or taking a look at the repositories that are being worked on.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, but that's a good question that didn't come up in our discussion. So thanks, David. That's good.
I think what will ultimately come from this conversation is we'll need to get better timelines on when we can expect this Juju publish workflow to become the norm, and then based on that, we need to change a lot of the tooling, how the review queue works, how our workflow works as charmers, and then from there we need to kind of figure out what are the initial sets of policies we should kind of put in place. And I imagine a lot of that will be fluid to figure out just exactly what we need to put in place to kind of make this work for everyone.
Another question. You mentioned charms with no or not good enough test coverage. Do we have or maintain a list of worst offenders? I'm thinking of the Python 2 to Python 3 transition. Like, many people maintain lists, and that allowed us to see the status of the overall transition to that. Would that be something we'd be interested in doing?
Yes, when we initially created these auto tests, we named all the test files 99-autotest. So we could pretty easily see which one have very basic tests just by looking for that file name. We don't really have an easy way to determine coverage in Juju just because of the complexity of the system that we're modeling. But we can easily create a short list of things that have just been given very simple tests and that potentially would need to be reviewed. That won't get everything, but that'll get a large portion of them.
Yeah, that's okay. Thanks. Didn't know that trick.
No further questions. Are we ready to vote?
Yeah, I guess. Let me just frame what we're voting on real briefly, because I know we kind of covered a lot of pieces of information at once. I think I'd like to take the vote to see if I don't really know what we're voting on.
The recap that we have here is that with the change to the review queue, what we're wanting to do now is, instead of reviewing charm code itself, we want to review the people to make a trusted network of contributors.
Yes, and that comes with a lot of heavy caveats and such, and I imagine or envision a lot of conversations spawning in the next couple of weeks around this on the mailing list, but that's the initial step forward I think we'd like to take, and I'm curious if people are interested in moving that way or not.
I don't think this is a sustainable model, the one we have right now, and I think I'm going to vote for that. So yes, I second it.
Yeah, well, if that's the way to do, like, I'll second as well. I think anything that takes burden away from us, well, actually anything that breaks bottlenecks is good.
Right. Right. +1.
All right, so missing votes for Jorge, Tim, and myself.
I am willing to vote for this as an alternative to what we have now, but I'm a little bit skeptical as to the longevity of this. I mean, we're moving from one non-scalable problem into another one, I think. It's, reviewing people is going to be very subjective. It's going to be hard to do that, and because of the subjectivity of it, it's going to take a lot of effort to do that well. On the other hand, I don't have a better idea, and what we do now is unsustainable as well. So I'm willing to +1 this in order that we just try a new approach and see how well it works, keeping in mind that we may find that this doesn't work very well either and have to try something else.
Excellent points. I don't envision there being any immediate change between now and the next Charmers meeting. What I'd like to do is draft up how this would look and figure out the timetables for when the store kind of changes itself. And then based on that, we can kind of make a final decision. But I'd like to at least bring it up for discussion, and appreciate everyone's feedback so far.
I think one of the larger issues at play here that we need to keep in mind is that no system that we model is going to be perfect. If you take a look at the kernel contributors list, they've got several layers of people filtering out commits before it ever reaches the core group of people. And they still have to peel back commits now and again. So, yeah, it is work, but I think that it's going to be a better system than what we have today, where we're just objectively looking at code and trying to cram that through a core group of like 8 people. So, I hear your reservations, Tim, and I +1 with the same reservations, but can't make progress without making change.
Yeah. I don't have a strong opinion on this topic, but I think I would second your opinion, Charles, to give it a chance, at least. So I'm okay.
That passes unanimously. Marco, you got the floor. Sorry, just wanted to make sure that we've got action items.
Oh, okay. I was like, I just think I just lost audio, but no, Chuck just muted himself, and he had a lot of white noise going on. So, okay, cool. That was that. My computer crashed, so I have to, on my laptop, I'm going to get a second to reorient myself real quickly. So I guess now that we've gone through that conversation, does anyone have any other topics like to bring up? I think I had one more for discussion. All right, it's a bunch of head shaking and silence.
I'm looking for our Breckenridge notes so that way I can get any last corner cases that we had there to bring up.
Yeah, I'm waiting for Google to restart itself on my desktop. So
there's actually quite a bit here, Marco. We had talk over charm composition. This is something that we had stated we wanted to talk about at the Charmers meeting, but I don't remember what that topic was. The docs with the online learning.
yeah, I mean those are all good things to bring up, but there's nothing that's really actionable on those. Those are things we're going to try. I don't think there's anything for that regards a policy change or not.
What about the inclusion of the dis.yaml, which is starting to become an accepted convention for config that you want to set during deploy, but not allowed to be changed, basically the immutable config.
Well, go ahead, discuss it.
Okay. In Breckenridge, there is a group of charms out there right now that's using this pattern, and I think it's a great pattern. They've included a dis.yaml in their charms. Reason being is that there's quite a few different distributions of the big data ecosystem, and this is how they modeled that with getting immutable config, because there's quite a few configuration options that you're going to want to set during deploy time, which may vary between vendor, but you don't necessarily want those values to be changed post-deployment. We have a policy in the charm store that config cannot be immutable. If you have a config option in config.yaml, it has to be actionable. Otherwise, it breaks the user experience. By introducing a secondary YAML into the charm structure, we've given them the capacity to set this immutable configuration and get these config items in the charm, basically, so that way they're still tunable, but they're not changeable once you've deployed the system. In other words, the charm does not look for these values after it's been set the first time. My question is, do we feel that this is a valuable enough pattern to see if we can't petition core to get this included in the boilerplate charm template, so that way it becomes an integral part of the ecosystem? Because more and more I'm talking to ISVs, and they're coming up with the same thing, that they have some immutable config options that they want to set on their charms.
Well, it's been my experience that ISVs do immutable config because it's easier, and they don't know how the charm model works. But I'm all for this dist.yaml file. I really like the way it works. I like what they came up with. So it's like config options that aren't actually in config.yaml, and I like that. So I'm all for it, but you know, I don't know how we're going to roll it in for real charms or how it works for, you know, regular charms. I think it's great to have that option because I do notice there's a lot of immutable config, and again, that breaks user experience. So I don't want to do that. So I want to make it as nice to use as possible and as easy to code as we can.
Yeah, I think it's better. I think having it in admitting reality is better than what we do now, which is just document the keys that you can't change, and that's a really awful experience. So, yeah. I mean, we already do this. It's just not done officially.
Right.
So this fixes. So for the use case that the big data team are using right now is that they have a lot of charms where the components can be switched out with a lot of underlying vendor pieces. And so this dist.yaml allows you to model that kind of configuration where you'll need to change it at deploy time in order for it to work properly for these different vendors. But I don't think this solves the cases of things like this Ceph charm where you have to supply the disks prior to deployment, and that is being modeled as an immutable configuration option.
Yeah, that's true. It's true.
Because that would allow, you would have to essentially download the charm and deploy locally to modify that dist.yaml. I think it's a great idea. I still think it's missing the point where these immutable configuration options. I really think the only way to solve immutable configuration options is to finally just embrace it, so that you could define a configuration key as immutable, and that Juju will prompt you at time of deploy for that option if they find it's immutable.
That's what I was going to lead into, is that once you set this in dist.yaml, you can't do anything with that after the fact. And in order for you to even set that initially, if you want to tweak it, you have to deploy local and then do an upgrade charm with switch to the charm store, and not many people know about that either. So.
So I still think this is something that we should solve and push to solve in core. I know we skirt around it a lot. We say, yes, all configuration options should be mutable, but there are all those exceptions that prove the rule. We have several of those charms now that are doing that. If we modeled that in a safe and sane way in Juju, it'd be much better. But I still like the dist.yaml concept. I think it's great for some of these projects where, you know, Hadoop is really not just Apache Hadoop, but there are 10 other companies that are also doing Hadoop, where the underlying mechanisms that drive the setup for Hadoop are all the same. It's just there are different things, package names to install different paths for different vendor things, but they all have the same actions they can take at the end of the day. So dist.yaml, I think, is an exceptional concept, but I still don't think it resolves the underlying issue of immutable configuration for Juju.
I think if we get it 60% of the way there and come up with a drafted spec, and propose that to core, it'll go a lot farther than saying no mutable config ever.
You know what? Maybe that's really the action we should take here. I'm willing to vote on including dis.yaml examples inside of the charm templates. That's cool. But I think an action item for this is just for us to draft how we think a mutable configuration should look, and then propose that to core to see what they think of as far as inclusion inside of the core itself.
I'm +1 for that, and I'm willing to take on the action item since I brought it up.
All right, cool. So that's your action item, but I'm still willing to vote on including the stuff in charm templates. Don't get me wrong there.
So I'm not entirely sure it makes so much sense to include it in the template. As in, if the option is there and available for people to use without it being in the default template, then I'm okay with that. But putting it into the default template kind of sounds like it's the blessed way to do things, which in my opinion shouldn't be. I think that should really be something that we add to Juju core.
Could I revise it slightly then? So we actually have a charm add generator. Would this be better as a charm add generator where you can charm add dis.yaml, which would give you an example of dis.yaml and the corresponding pieces you required? So you would never see it as part of default boilerplate, but if you knew about it, you'd have an easy way to add in the boilerplate for this stuff.
Okay, that makes more sense. Yeah, if it's not by default, that's something that people would expect is like recommended or the blessed way to do things. Because it in my opinion, it shouldn't really be. It's kind of a workaround until it's properly done in core. Well, that's my opinion.
I'll +1 that, Marco. I agree with that as the charm add thing. I wasn't aware that it didn't work. I forgot that it didn't work unless you have the charm locally, so you're right. That makes sense.
Cool. Anyone else in for that? Abstain? No?
+1 from my side.
Quick question. So the charm add, this command will just will create a new dis.yaml file and that's it?
Whatever else is required for the boilerplate for that, I'm not 100% certain, but essentially charm add dis.yaml or whatever they decide to call it. Since we already have things like charm add readme, charm add tests, etc. This is just a generator to add on top of that. So I'm not sure if this would also do things like set up and install charm helpers or whatever other pieces that are required if they're not already present. Whatever is there to just kind of create the boilerplate for the dis.yaml stuff.
There's a few things to note here that this presently only does work in languages that support YAML parsing. Like if we do this in a bash charm, they're not going to have access to that because they're getting all those config values through config get.
Well,
Just YAML is not going to be parsed by anything for them.
They could make it available through the CHLP command, since it is simply just YAML parsing keys.
This is true.
If it was exposed through the programmable API for charm helpers, then that wouldn't be an issue. But it is currently, I think, limited to Python.
So maybe that's like a attack add-on to the actual proposal, is getting a CHLP script together and then documenting how that would work.
Well, I think whoever is maintaining that project should consider it strongly for better acceptance in charming, but yeah.
True. All right, it looks like majority. We've got 2 abstains.
Yeah, I'm +1 on it as long as... the reason I asked the last question was because if it's just adding a YAML file, then it seems maybe a little overkill to add it as a command instead of just saying, hey, if you want immutable options, keep them in a separate YAML file. But if we're doing more than that, then I'm +1 on a command to help it along.
Well, by that logic, the charm add readme command is also just jumping a simple file in place.
Yeah, true, but it at least gives them a template of what kind of information that we expect in the README.
That's true. I don't remember the dist YAML format. I don't know if it strays from the config YAML format in any sense. I
Not
actually
at
don't know. Not at all? Okay, well then. I guess that it'd be better just to have the convention than just to say, hey, make it dist.yaml with a configuration YAML file settings. That's a good point. I'm not sure. We have to speak with the upstream for that project. But I know it'll at least require charm tools to be installed, so whether that's doing some other kind of magic inside the charm to make it so that it's pip installed or embedded properly is... I'm sure that generator can go a long way to making sure the charm does what it needs to for that dist YAML. Cool. Does anyone have any other topics they want to bring up?
Bundle tester.
Yes.
Can we get it packaged and put in Juju stable?
I would certainly do that for you. I'll actually just take that action item. I don't even need anyone to tell me to do it because that's a great idea.
Okay, cool.
This is an important thing that I've meant to bring up. We want to change the way that Juju charm test command works. So one thing that we have that we published the list recently is this whole charm box, which is a Docker container that has all these tools and suites installed and allows you to isolate your environment. A lot of people on the solutions team and the charmers team that have been doing charm reviews have been using it to do isolation so that the charms testing dependencies don't dirty up your host system. We actually just recently implemented this in CI as well, or Tim has added it to CI, where the charm testing infrastructure will run all tests in an isolated environment, so you must have dependencies outlined, etc. We want to change the charm test command in charm tools to actually align with what CI is doing. So what charm test will do going forward, instead of it having a split brain where it's slightly similar logic that bundle tester implements, instead it'll simply spin up a charm box Docker container and execute the same steps that the testing infrastructure does inside that Docker container. So you'll get the same isolation that the CI has. Docker is very efficient at spinning up these very, very light application containers and then executing everything against it and then simply coming back with the results. So you'll have the same experience that you would on CI, so any dependencies you're missing you'll catch earlier on. And then you also have a sane way to keep your environment clean, essentially a more robust version of virtual M for your desktop for charm testing. I think it's a fairly good idea. I don't know many people who would object, but I'm curious of people's opinions on this this kind of shift in what charm test does currently.
I'm plus 1,000 on this.
Well, that was shocking.
Yeah, I just wanted to let you guys know that I don't object to everything.
Yeah, right. Is it because you work with Bundle Tester every day?
So I think Tim just overruled all of us.
No, and I'm curious of. I know that there are still some charms. So the downside of this is there are still some charms who have make targets for tests that actually run charm test. So this will essentially break Bundle Tester. And for those of you who don't know the difference, charm test simply is designed to run the tests in the test directory for a charm, and it stands up the environment before each test run. Bundle Tester does that portion, but a bunch more. And one of the things it does is it sniffs out make targets. So if it finds make test, it'll run make test, which will then now be the new stand up a charm box and then run Bundle Tester. So you have this infinite recursion going on. So that's something that we'll have to change. You can change it very simply by adding a blacklist for make targets in your test directory. So there is a test.yaml convention that allows you to blacklist any make targets that you don't want run. So you can say Bundle Tester, do not run the make test, and it'll just simply fall back to running its default execute all tests in the directory, which was what charm test was doing previously. Outside that change, there is not much difference except that bundle tester is actually what we use in the CI infrastructure, and charm test is not. It's kind of the old way of doing things. So that's why we want to kind of repurpose this command to give people this similar experience. So any opinions on that? Any concerns? If not, I'd like to see if everyone's okay with me at least making this change to the charm tools in the next release.
So charm test is the same as Juju test?
Yes, Juju test and charm test are the same command.
Okay. I'm sorry, I've never heard of charm test before.
Oh yeah,
Sounds
it was
bad, but
no. Juju test was Juju test and charm test became the same thing about 2 or 3 years ago.
Okay.
And Juju test was just set as an alias to make people's lives a little easier.
All right. Yeah, I'm fine with that going away. It needs to go away.
Okay, well, it'll just be replaced with bundle tester and a container instead.
Yep.
But yeah. Okay, cool.
Yep.
One important thing to note is that we're adding a dependency to Docker here, and I'm curious of what the implications of this are overall. It's just a reservation, and I'm not negative oneing it. I personally think this is a huge +1 to what we're doing.
So that's not a problem on Linux because charm tools is installed with apt, and apt has dependency chains, and Docker's in the archive. Brew is not an issue at all either because Brew has Docker inside of Homebrew as well. We can link that as dependency. The only issue becomes for Windows installations. And I think if we make a sane warning where if we can detect if Docker is installed, and then the command will simply say, please install Docker, and link to the Docker installation notes, that'll alleviate that last piece. Or for any architecture, really, if people do pip install, it'll leave Docker installed as well. There's no way to do that in charm tools.
Okay.
So I'll make a note of that if this does pass, which I think it is, but to add that as a thing to check for. Explicit dependency checking for Docker.
Yeah, I wonder if it wouldn't be worth just if they don't have Docker installed, or they don't want to install it, to let it run, just run bundle tester as usual without the isolation.
I worry that we give the wrong impression of what's going on. I think the isolated dependencies is, well, I know that we've caught this several times in infrastructure where people have had things like, I don't know, Python dev installed or virtual env installed or some other dependency installed, and they didn't realize they needed it in the tests as well because of the testing environment. I think the isolation's good. Yeah, I think the isolation's good to have, and enforcing it. I mean, we could probably have a flag to disable isolation, but I wouldn't make it something that just happened magically if you didn't have Docker installed. And then I will, as a part of this work, go through all the charms and see any charm that's currently promulgated that has a charm or Juju test command inside their make file that would potentially break this with this whole recursion thing, and have a list of that posted so we can get the maintainers contacted about this change. Cool. I think that's. We get Chuck. Were you counting? I know it was counting votes.
It was counting votes. We're missing 3.
+1.
Okay. You're free to abstain as well. I understand these crazy harebrained schemes of mine.
Yeah, I guess I'll abstain because I don't have a strong incentive one way or another. So.
Cool.
Well, actually, I'll take that back. I'll +1 because yeah, if it makes your life easier, that means I'll make mine as well. So yeah.
All right. I don't know. Does anyone have any other topics they want to bring up for discussion?
One thing, just as a general FYI, I think some of us know this. Chuck, Marco, Matt already know this, but we're talking about testing in CI and the new Docker containment strategy. That's in CI, but is not hooked up to the review queue yet. So if you're kicking off tests from the review queue, it's not using the new Jenkins jobs that have the Docker containment in it. So that's something we're still working on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that should be resolved this week, hopefully. If not, the following week for sure. All right, I'll go ahead and just one more time make sure we're not missing anyone who bring any topics in the last 10 minutes. If not, I think we'll depart the meeting with the exception of defining when the best time is for the next one. I know that month of April is kind of crazy for a lot of people, so we may just defer that to figuring one out by email instead of rabble-rousing. But this, I actually had a question. Does this time slot work well for everyone so far on the call?
Yes.
Yep, pretty well, yeah.
Okay, cool. I think we'll keep here at about this time. So a couple of things we have. We're changing the Charm School format slightly. We're using now instead Juju office hours. They're happening about every 2 to 3 weeks. They're on the Ubuntu on-air calendar. It'll be several charmers and anyone else who wants to join to ask questions or answer questions, show off things they're doing. Those will be about an hour long or however long we need until we get people's questions answered. Excuse me. So you can look for those on the Ubuntu Air calendar going forward. I think that's it, unless anyone has any other questions. Well, thank you guys all for joining. Again, anyone who's watching this video later has any questions about what we've discussed or any questions about Juju at all, we're in #Juju on freenode.net. We're also can be found at juju@lists.ubuntu.com and jujucharms.com. So, thanks, everyone.
Cheers.
Cheers, guys. Bye.